Ever watched a billionaire freeze in 104-degree Phoenix heat just from seeing a lemonade stand? Julian Whitaker stepped out of his Bentley, stopped cold across the street from Naomi's famous lemonade, and realized the empire he built was emptier than her courage. Here's the truth: that lemonade stand wasn't nostalgia. It was the front line of a revolution Naomi served cup by cup for 28 years. And behind it, a woman who rebuilt life under every no she was told. At 46, Julian had everything the world said mattered. I'm Marcus Green, 35, storyteller and chronicler of Black woman's true legacies, who never needed a tower to prove she belonged. Naomi's fight is the quiet kind that shakes cities. In the next 60 seconds, you'll learn how one lemonade stand forced a billionaire to rewrite his story, why Naomi refused a six-figure payoff and what it sparked, how a restaurant became a community movement that government and media couldn't ignore. Naomi didn't just survive power plays and erasure, she built a sanctuary. She turned debt into donation recipes, into mentorship scars, into scholarships. And when scandal hit, she stepped up on a mic in a room built to silence her. Skip this, and you miss the moment a woman served justice alongside sweet tea. This isn't just her comeback. It's a challenge who's next to sit at a table they built. Real estate empire. A skyscraper with his name on it. Lavish properties across 3 continents. A scheduled lunch with the mayor. And yet, in this exact moment, none of it mattered. Because across the street at a corner he hadn't passed in decades, he saw something or someone that pulled the breath clean from his chest. It wasn't the faded wooden lemonade stand. Not the small hand-painted sign that read, Naomi's famous lemonade. Still the best in Phoenix. It wasn't the fact that the stand looked like it hadn't changed since he was 17. It was the woman behind it, Naomi Carter. Julian stood frozen on the sidewalk, one hand still on the car door, the other slowly loosening the collar of his shirt, like he couldn't breathe. She hadn't seen him. She was busy handing 2 plastic cups of lemonade to a young couple pushing a stroller, her face bright with the same quiet grace he remembered from a lifetime ago. Her curls were tinged with silver, now tied back with a scarf like she always used to wear on lazy summer days. There were faint lines around her eyes, but her smile hadn't aged a day. Julian's heart pounded. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was recognition, sharp and aching. He glanced down at his phone. His assistant had texted twice already. Meeting with Goldwater and Blake in 12 mins. Contracts ready. Where are you? He didn't respond. 28 years. That's how long it had been since he last saw her. Since the night he left without saying goodbye. Since his father's words rang in his ears like a final sentence. A Whitaker does not throw away his future for a girl who serves lemonade on the wrong side of town. Back then, Julian had been 17 and terrified of failure of his parents, of becoming someone who disappointed the family legacy. He left Phoenix for college in New York, supposedly to grow up. But watching Naomi now carefully wiping down her table in the blistering sun, Julian realized he hadn't grown up at all. He'd just gotten older, richer, emptier. Cancel my meetings, he said aloud. His assistant, who'd just stepped out of the back seat with a leather portfolio, blinked. Sir, clear my afternoon. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the stand, on the woman behind it, on the corner where his life had split in 2. For the first time in 28 years, Julian whispered more to himself than anyone else, everything's absolutely perfect. He took a step forward. Naomi was counting her change when she heard footsteps. Welcome to Naomi's famous lemon. Her words caught in her throat. She looked up, and time collapsed between them like a folding chair. Gone were the honking horns, the chatter of nearby tables, the low buzz of city life. In that moment, it was just them, 2 people who had once believed love was enough to fight the world. Julian stood a few feet from the stand, unsure what to say. Naomi was the first to speak. You're standing in the sun, she said softly. It's 104 degrees. You'll melt in that suit. He managed a breathless laugh. I think I melted a long time ago. She stared at him for a beat longer, then turned back to stack her cups. Her hands moved with muscle memory, but there was a tremble in her fingers he didn't miss. Your sign, he said. still handwritten. Some things never change. I remember the first one said, "Best lemonade in Phoenix, only 50 cents. You spelled Phoenix wrong." She cracked the tiniest smile. "You teased me for weeks." Julian nodded slowly. "And the lemonade." Naomi picked up the pitcher, poured it into a fresh cup with the same care she'd used 3 decades ago. She held it out without a word. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and it felt like the air thickened between them. He sipped. It was sweet, tangy, simple, unchanged. Julian closed his eyes for a second. The taste yanked him back to nights on front porches, stolen kisses under desert stars, whispered promises they were too young to keep. "I thought you left," Naomi said. Her voice was even, but he could hear the crack beneath it. "I did, and never looked back." "I did," he said again. "Every day." She stared at him, skeptical, but not cold. He gestured to the stand. "Still here, still the same recipe, still the same corner." "Every day," Naomi replied. "For 28 years. Why?" His throat tightened. "Why here?" Naomi's gaze didn't falter. "Because someone had to remember." The heat pressed down on them, but Julian barely noticed. His world was narrowing, past deals, headlines, Forbes lists, all shrinking behind this moment. He placed $100 bill on the counter. Naomi looked at it, then picked it up and offered it back. "Your money's no good here, Julian Whitaker." "It never was." He smiled gently. "Then maybe I can pay another way?" She paused. "Let me make up for lost time," he said quietly. "If you'll let me." Naomi didn't respond, but she didn't tell him to leave either. And in her silence, Julian heard something unexpected. A second chance. Julian sat at the edge of the sidewalk, the lemonade in his hand, already sweating through the cup. Naomi turned her back to him, busying herself with organizing the cash box and arranging napkins that didn't need arranging. The silence between them was not awkward. It was thick, heavy with history. Across the street, the city pulsed with life. Honking horns. A construction crane slowly lifting steel into a skyline Julian helped design. People walked by in business attire, never glancing at the quiet little lemonade stand. Or the woman who'd been rooted here, like a desert flower, for nearly 3 decades. He looked at her again. Really looked. The way the sun lit her cheekbones. The way her brow furrowed slightly when she concentrated. Time had not dulled Naomi. It had deepened her. And maybe it was guilt or memory or something heavier, but Julian felt 17 again. Terrified, tongue-tied, and too aware of how much she still mattered. "Why here, Naomi?" he asked again, softer this time. "Why this street corner?" She didn't turn around. "Because this is where everything ended," she said. "And if you stand in the same place long enough, maybe something begins again." Julian swallowed hard. The last time he stood here, he had been gripping her hand, pleading for her to understand. They were just kids, star-crossed and reckless. Naomi had just found out her scholarship was revoked. Her mother was fired from the Whitaker estate, and her world was crumbling. Julian had begged her to come with him, to run, to disappear. But she knew better. She knew he wouldn't survive without his father's approval. She let go, and he let her. Julian had left Phoenix the next morning. "No one ever really asked what happened," Naomi said, turning to face him now. "Everyone assumed I got dumped by the rich boy, that I cried over it for a few months, then got over it. But I didn't." Julian's jaw clenched. "Naomi, you don't have to explain," she cut in. "I know what families like yours expected. What kind of woman I wasn't allowed to be." He didn't deny it. "My father didn't just take away your scholarship," he said, voice low. "He made sure no other college would take you. He made calls. He erased your name." Naomi's hands stilled. "I found the paperwork years later," Julian continued. "After he died. It was buried in an old safe." She looked away, breathing carefully. "So why now? Why today?" Julian hesitated. "Because I didn't know you were still here." Naomi let out a small, bitter laugh. "Of course you didn't. I thought maybe you moved on, built something better." "I did," she replied, eyes burning. "I built a life without apologies, without waiting for someone to come back and fix things. Julian nodded, the lemonade turning warm in his hand. I'm not here to fix anything, he said. I saw you and everything stopped. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about profit margins or merger deadlines. I was thinking about that day we sat on the curb drinking lemonade, and you told me you'd name your first restaurant Naomi's Table. Naomi's eyes flickered. I did name it that. Julian blinked. You opened it. It's small, she said. Corner of Jefferson and Ninth. Only open evenings. I cook everything myself. Still your recipes, he asked. Still my soul, she replied. He smiled. Can I come by sometime? Naomi shrugged. It's open to the public. That's not what I meant. She met his gaze for the first time in minutes. There was a storm in her eyes, years of disappointment, of strength worn thin and rebuilt from the ground up. But there was something else too, a flicker, a question unspoken. Julian stood brushing off his trousers. You're right, he said. I didn't stay. I didn't fight. And I'm not asking for anything now, but if there's even one part of you that still remembers how it felt. Naomi interrupted, voice steady. I remember everything. He exhaled slowly, his chest tight with something fragile. I'll be at your restaurant tomorrow night, he said. No entourage, no cameras, just me. Naomi said nothing. As Julian turned to leave, a wind blew down the street, rustling napkins and lifting dust into the air. He glanced back one last time. Naomi stood behind her lemonade stand like a monument, weathered but unshaken. He realized then that it wasn't just guilt that brought him here. It was gravity. And after 28 years of orbiting a life he didn't want, Julian Whitaker had finally come home. That evening, Naomi stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror in her small one-bedroom apartment, peeling off her lemonade-stained apron. The sounds of Phoenix at dusk hummed outside her window, cars humming, cicadas singing, in somewhere a faint melody from a neighbor's radio. But her thoughts weren't on the city. They were on him, Julian Whitaker. His name still tasted foreign in her mouth after all these years, sweet, dangerous, unfinished. Seeing him again had cracked something open she thought had long been sealed shut. Not just the past, but something deeper. A wound that never scabbed over because she'd never had time to stop and feel it. For 28 years, Naomi had survived. She'd raised Imani. She'd built her restaurant from scratch. She'd kept her promise to herself, never depend on anyone again, especially not a man like Julian, who had once let go when she needed him most. And yet, his voice still warm, his eyes older but familiar. That look, the one she remembered when he first told her he loved her, under a busted street lamp outside her mama's porch. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was real. Still real. Naomi shook her head hard. She didn't have time for ghosts. She had a restaurant to prep, rent to pay, and a daughter coming home from her teaching shift in 2 hours. But as she reached for a towel, something caught her eye. An old photo wedged into the mirror's corner, faded, slightly torn. Her and Julian, both 17, leaning against that same lemonade stand, cups in hand, laughing like the world had no weight. She sighed. Not sadness, not even regret. Resolve. Across town, Julian stood alone in his penthouse kitchen, untouched sushi spread out on marble counters, city lights sparkling like constellations behind him. He held Naomi's lemonade cup in his hands, not to drink, but to remember. The power in that small plastic thing, it humbled him. It reminded him that there was a time he wanted more than wealth. He wanted a future with meaning. He wanted her. And now maybe he wanted redemption. He opened his laptop, canceled every meeting for the next day. Then he pulled up the address, Naomi's Table, 203 Jefferson Street. A few Yelp reviews. Photos of Southern-style comfort food. One blurry image of Naomi in the background apron on stirring a pot, unaware of the camera. Julian stared at the screen like it was sacred. Tomorrow he'd walk into her restaurant, not as Julian Whitaker, the empire builder, but as the boy who once promised to love her forever and failed. He didn't know if she'd forgive him. He wasn't even sure he deserved that. But she deserved the truth, and he'd start by sitting at her table. No press, no fanfare, Just one seat, and the hope of a second chance. The sign above the restaurant door read Naomi's table in soft cursive lettering, carved into reclaimed wood. Beneath it, a row of amber string lights flickered gently, casting a warm glow over the entrance as the last rays of daylight slipped behind Phoenix's skyline. Julian paused outside. He'd been to Michelin-starred temples in New York, marble-wrapped lounges in Paris, and rooftop sushi bars in Tokyo. But somehow this place, modest, tucked between a barbershop and a tire repair garage, had his palms sweating like it was his first date. Inside, the hum of soft jazz filtered through the windows. Through the glass he could see families gathered at mismatched wooden tables, laughter bubbling above clinking silverware, and the aroma of garlic rosemary and something sweet baking in the back. He stepped in. The change hit him instantly. It wasn't just the shift in temperature, it was the energy. Cozy, lived in, reverent somehow, like a chapel of flavor and memory. A hostess with long braids and a notepad smiled at him. Table for one. Julian nodded suddenly, unsure of himself. If Naomi's cooking tonight, then yes. The woman grinned knowingly and led him past a chalkboard menu full of names that felt personal. Mama Ruth's peach cobbler Sunday chicken and grits, Amani's garlic greens. Julian sat at a corner table beneath a faded photo of three black women laughing in a sunlit kitchen. He looked around, scanning for her, and then he saw her. Naomi emerged from the kitchen with a small tray, her apron tied neatly, her posture graceful. She handed a plate to a nearby table, exchanged a few words, and smiled a real smile, not the one she gave customers on the sidewalk. She hadn't noticed him yet. Julian couldn't look away. The woman at the lemonade stand was strong. Yes, but this woman here, she was something else. She moved like someone who knew her space, owned it. Not just the building, but the hearts inside it. He suddenly felt small, like a guest in a life she'd built from the ashes of the one he helped burn. Water for now, the hostess asked, snapping him back. Yeah, thanks, he muttered. Then, seeing Naomi turn in his direction, he straightened his jacket and cleared his throat like a teenager on prom night. Their eyes met. No surprise this time, just a long, calm look. Naomi walked over slowly. No rush, no smile. You came, she said simply. I said I would, Julian replied. Naomi tilted her head. Most people say things they don't mean. He nodded. I've done enough of that. There was a beat of silence. Then she gestured to the menu. What'll it be? Julian scanned it, though he already knew. Whatever your signature is. Naomi gave a small nod. You'll get the first Friday plate. What's in it? Faith, garlic, and a little bit of hurt pride. Julian chuckled. Sounds familiar. She walked away before he could say more, disappearing behind swinging kitchen doors. And for a moment, he just sat there, letting the smell, the warmth, the truth of the place wash over him. He glanced around again and noticed something he'd missed before. Nearly every table had a photo frame. Smiling faces, old family recipes under glass. Quotes etched into wood. We keep what they tried to bury. Love, salt, rest. And then he saw a photo of Naomi with the mayor. They stood shoulder to shoulder at a groundbreaking ceremony for a youth center, Naomi holding the shovel front and center. Julian blinked. That wasn't in any of the dossiers his team pulled. That wasn't in any article or social feed. Who the hell had he walked away from all those years ago? She wasn't just a woman who sold lemonade. She was a woman who could shift a community with a spoon and a smile. And suddenly he felt less like a man making amends and more like one trying to catch up. Julian was still processing the photo with the mayor when a voice broke into his thoughts. You came back for the food or for her? He looked up. A young woman, mid-20s, confident posture, and sharp eyes stood at the edge of his table. She wore a black t-shirt with Naomi's table printed across the chest and a pen tucked behind one ear. Her features were a reflection of someone he used to know, same high cheekbones, same fierce stare. Her name tag read, Imani. Julian stood slowly. You must be Imani. You remember my name? She asked, arms crossed. I used to write it in notebooks, he said, offering a tentative smile. Back when I thought I'd get to meet you one day. I was 17. She didn't smile back. That day never came, Imani replied. Guess it took you a few decades to grow a conscience. Julian didn't flinch. He had expected some version of this. What he hadn't expected was how much her presence would unsettle him, not because of her anger, but because she had every right to it. I never forgot about your mother, he said, voice quiet. But you did forget how to use a phone, Imani asked. Email, postcard even. Julian exhaled. I didn't know what I could say that wouldn't sound hollow. So you said nothing. He nodded. No defense. Imani studied him for a long moment, like a lawyer assessing a witness. You came here to fix something. But this isn't a redemption tour. We're not a story you get to wrap up with a heartfelt speech and a slow piano soundtrack. Julian nodded again. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to listen. She tilted her head skeptical. Rich men don't listen. They acquire. A pause. Then almost too soft to hear. Are you here to buy us out? No, he said firmly. Not even close. Imani didn't respond immediately. She turned and poured water into his glass, with slow, precise movement. My mother doesn't need a savior, she said. And I don't need a second father. I didn't come to be either. Good, Imani replied, straightening. Because everything we built here, we built it without you. She walked off before he could respond, disappearing into the back. Julian sat with his hands in his lap, heart pounding harder than any boardroom negotiation ever had. Dinner arrived a few minutes later, a steaming plate of rosemary chicken garlic greens and honey cornbread. It looked simple, but one bite told him it was art. Naomi's food didn't just taste good, it told the truth. He chewed slowly, wondering how many evenings she spent in this kitchen, perfecting recipes while he hosted champagne galas. How many times she tucked Imani in alone while he took bows at real estate conferences. She had built a legacy without wealth, without applause, and it was stronger than anything his millions had bought. He scanned the restaurant again. One wall displayed news clippings and community flyers. In the center was a framed quote from an op-ed. Some women carry cities on their backs and call it dinner. Phoenix Journal. Julian stood and walked closer. Beneath the quote was a headline. Local restaurateur declines $2 buyout to protect community space. The photo showed Naomi, arms folded in front of her restaurant, unshaken, surrounded by a small crowd of supporters. Julian's chest tightened. He knew the man who made the offer, Jerry Hodge from Horizon Developments, one of Julian's former associates. So someone had already tried to buy her out. She'd said no, because someone had to remember. Naomi's words echoed in his mind. She wasn't just surviving. She was protecting something, preserving a space not just for herself, but for others. He looked around, families laughing, elders sipping iced tea, kids drawing on paper menus, and it hit him. This place wasn't just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary. A line formed at the front counter. Naomi reappeared to ring up orders, slipping into her rhythm with ease. Her smile was warmer now, her shoulders looser. Julian stayed seated, observing. He'd come back to say sorry. Now he wasn't sure if that was enough. Naomi joined Julian at the table just as he finished the last bite of her cornbread. She slid into the chair opposite him, hands folded neatly, eyes calm but unreadable. Still the best in Phoenix, she asked. Julian set down his fork. That and more. Naomi gave a faint smile. That plate's named after my late grandmother. She used to say, don't let the world fill your mouth with bitterness. Cook something sweet instead. She must have been incredible, he said. She was, Naomi replied. Taught me to trust my instincts and never let a man's silence define my worth. Julian looked away for a moment. I saw the photo, he said, motioning toward the wall, with the mayor, the youth center, and the article about the buyout. Naomi nodded. They tried to turn this block into another condo project. Said my restaurant was underutilized real estate. And you said no. Damn right I did. Her voice was firm but not defensive. Because this place isn't just mine. It belongs to the people who walk here after work, the families who can't afford a $40 entree, the elders who come for chess and peach cobbler on Friday nights. Julian studied her. You always had that fire? No, Naomi said. I had to build it, every day brick by brick. When you left, I didn't just lose love, I lost access. No one returned my calls. Imani's school applications disappeared. The landlord doubled our rent. I got the message, stay quiet, stay small. She leaned forward slightly, but I didn't. Julian's throat tightened. I didn't know they came after you like that. You didn't ask, she said simply. But I'm not angry anymore. I just don't waste time explaining myself to people who underestimated me. There was no venom in her voice, only clarity. Julian nodded slowly. You built something beautiful, Naomi. Strong, real. She met his gaze. And now you want to be part of it again? He hesitated. I don't know what I want yet, he admitted. But I know I want to start by respecting what you've built. Not interrupting it, not fixing it, just seeing it. Naomi exhaled, leaning back. For the first time that night, something softened in her eyes. You're welcome to keep watching, she said. But don't expect applause for showing up. Julian gave a quiet, earnest smile. No applause needed, he said. Just the chance to stay seated at the table. Julian sat in his study, bathed in the dim glow of his desk lamp, papers spread out in front of him, like puzzle pieces from another life. The quiet hum of the city outside his penthouse felt distant, irrelevant. He wasn't thinking about stock prices or board meetings tonight. He was thinking about Naomi and the man named Calvin Devereaux. Julian had heard the name before, briefly back in New York. A loan shark turned entrepreneur, Calvin made his fortune preying on people in desperate situations. And yet somehow Naomi had once signed a loan contract with him. That much Julian had confirmed through a contact in finance law, someone who owed him a favor. But that wasn't what bothered Julian most. It was the date on the contract 15 years ago, just a year after Naomi's ex-husband had declared bankruptcy. Julian stared at the document again. Naomi had signed as a co-guarantor, which meant she'd taken on her ex's debt, not because she owed it, but because if she hadn't, their daughter would have lost the house they lived in. Julian pushed the papers aside, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of shame. While he was popping champagne at launch parties and shaking hands with billionaires, Naomi had been negotiating with men like Calvin to keep her lights on, to keep her child in school, to protect Imani from the fallout of a man who had walked away. Not one man, two. The next day, he arrived at Naomi's restaurant unannounced, not during dinner rush, but midday. The doors were locked. The sign flipped to closed, prep in progress. He knocked gently. A few seconds passed before Naomi opened the door, halfway wearing a flour-dusted apron, her hair tied back in a scarf. You're early, she said, not smiling. I know. She hesitated before letting him in. The restaurant was quite warm from the ovens, the scent of roasted garlic and vanilla hanging in the air like a memory. Julian held a folder in his hands, but didn't offer it right away. I found something, he said. I wasn't looking to dig into your past, I swear, but when I heard Calvin Devereaux's name, Naomi's jaw tightened. Julian continued. I know what you did, with the loan, with your ex-husband's debt. She looked away. You took the fall for a man who left you, Julian said, voice soft. And you did it in silence. Naomi wiped her hands on her apron. I did what I had to do. That's what women like me do. Women like you. She met his eyes, steady, unafraid. Black women who are tired of saving everyone but themselves. Who carry shame that doesn't belong to them just to keep their families together. Julian swallowed hard. You could have told me. No, Julian, she said. I couldn't. You weren't here. The silence stretched between them, not sharp this time, but heavy with everything unsaid. Then she added, You think this restaurant is about food, about nostalgia. He didn't answer. Naomi stepped closer, wiping a smudge of flour from her wrist. I built this place with money from 3 jobs, with recipes passed down from women who were never invited to sit at the tables they cooked for. I opened it not because I needed to prove something to the world, but because I needed to prove something to myself. Julian finally held out the folder. I believe you. I just, I didn't know how much I didn't know. Naomi looked at the folder, then back at him. I'm not who you think I am, she said quietly. And I never was. Julian stood frozen after Naomi's words. I'm not who you think I am, and I never was. It wasn't said with bitterness. It was said with finality. Like the closing of a chapter 1 she had long since finished while he was still stuck rereading the prologue. Naomi didn't reach for the folder in his hand. Instead, she walked past him toward the back of the restaurant. Come on, she said. If you're going to see this, you may as well see all of it. Julian followed the smell of roasted yams and baked thyme trailing behind them like ghosts. She led him through a narrow hallway behind the kitchen into a small storage room. But instead of boxes or cleaning supplies, the walls were lined with filing cabinets and corkboards covered in sticky notes, grant application deadlines, old receipts, and Polaroid photos. Naomi flipped on the light. This is the real engine behind Naomi's table, she said. We've helped 12 women start their own food carts or catering businesses. 6 of them are single mothers. 3 were formerly incarcerated. Every Friday, we run a rotating menu where all profits go into a shared loan fund, interest-free. Julian looked around the room, stunned. This wasn't a restaurant. This was an operation, a movement disguised as a menu. You did this all on your own. Naomi smirked. With community. With women who understood what it felt like to be told, you're just a server, or you're just a cook. She picked up a framed certificate from the corner shelf. This is the one I'm proudest of, she said. Whitaker Foundation Women's Initiative Grant. They never knew it was me. Julian blinked. Wait, you applied under a pseudonym? Naomi nodded. Had to. Your mother was on the board. That name hit him like a cold slap. Vivian Whitaker. Julian's mother had always been the architect behind the family's image, refined, untouchable, perfectly manicured, in every room she entered. But Julian also knew if his father was the enforcer, his mother was the strategist. Naomi. She knew who I was, Naomi said, even back then, and she made sure I stayed in the past. Julian felt the old rage rise in his throat. She told me you didn't want to see me again, that you'd moved on, that you were dating someone else. Naomi didn't even blink. And you believed her? He didn't answer, because the truth was, he had. At 17, alone in a new city, desperate to prove he belonged, Julian had clung to those lies like a lifeline. Naomi crossed her arms. 2 years ago she came back, in person this time, right outside this building. Julian's stomach turned. What? She offered me a check, Naomi said. A 6-figure gift to help me expand. I knew what she meant. She wanted me quiet, out of sight, out of your story. What did you say? Naomi gave a short, humorless laugh. I told her the kitchen was closed. Julian couldn't speak. She said I was poison, Naomi added. Said I'd never be good enough to stand beside you. But you know what? She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. I wasn't trying to stand beside you. I was building something under my own name. And you did, Julian whispered. You really did. They stood in silence for a beat. Then Naomi asked, Why now, Julian? Why come back after all this time? He looked down at the floor the past 30 years, rushing through him like wildfire. Because I couldn't stop thinking about the taste of your lemonade, he said quietly. Not the drink. The moment, the feeling, the truth of it. Naomi blinked just once. I came back thinking I could make amends. But I see now that was still about me. I thought you needed closure. He looked at her again, truly saw her. But maybe I was the one who never closed the chapter. And maybe I'm just here to finally admit that I was never strong enough to stay, and you were strong enough to survive without me. Naomi didn't reply right away, but after a long moment she reached into a cabinet and pulled out a small, aged envelope. She handed it to him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter dated 26 years ago. It was written in his handwriting, a letter he'd never sent. He looked up in disbelief. You kept this. Naomi nodded. Because even when people leave, words stay. Julian sat alone in the empty restaurant, the letter still in his hand. His 17-year-old handwriting wavered across the page, half poetry, half apology. He remembered writing it on a rainy night in a New York dorm room full of guilt and longing, then folding it and never mailing it. He couldn't even remember why. Maybe he thought it wouldn't matter? Maybe he thought Naomi wouldn't read it? And yet she had kept it, through all the debt, the pressure, the betrayal. She'd held on to something he hadn't been brave enough to send. He read the last line aloud to himself. If I were stronger, I would have stayed. But I hope you build something so beautiful they can never forget your name. He looked up. She had. That night, Julian drove to his mother's estate. He hadn't spoken to Vivian in months, not since stepping back from certain board decisions, not since she'd hinted Naomi's restaurant was bad optics. But now, he needed answers, and he wanted to look her in the eye when he asked them. Vivian met him in her sunroom sipping white wine beneath a chandelier shaped like icicles. I assume you've been to the restaurant, she said without looking up. I have. Charming, she said. If you like exposed brick and trauma-laced nostalgia. Julian didn't take the bait. You went there. You offered her money. She didn't take it? His mother replied, setting her glass down. Of course she didn't. Women like Naomi always prefer the moral high ground, even if it costs them everything. No, Julian said. She just won't sell her dignity to anyone, especially not you. Vivian leaned back. And now you've come to rescue her. Julian shook his head. No. I came to say I'm done pretending your version of legacy is the only one that matters. His mother scoffed, but he was already walking toward the door. I'm building something else now, he said over his shoulder, and this time I'll remember who helped lay the foundation. Back at Naomi's table, the ovens were off. The chairs were stacked. Naomi sat alone in the back room sipping herbal tea, staring at a bulletin board covered in thank you notes from women she had mentored. She heard the door open. Footsteps. Then Julian appeared. No fanfare. No flowers. Just him. He sat down across from her. I told my mother no, he said. Naomi met his gaze surprised. And did she disown you? Not yet, he smirked. But I'd survive it. Some women taught me how. Naomi smiled softly. For once, it wasn't guarded. Julian leaned forward. Whatever comes next, Naomi, I don't want it to be about fixing the past. I want it to be about honoring it. She studied him a long time, then nodded. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a finish line. Maybe it was a table. And tonight they had both finally taken their seats. The article dropped on a Tuesday. No warning. Just a bold headline splashed across the Phoenix Sentinel's homepage at 6:02 a.m. Inside the Whitaker Foundation. Secret payouts. Silenced voices. Naomi saw it when she stepped into the kitchen that morning, still tying her apron. Her phone buzzed nonstop on the counter. Messages, missed calls, mentions. The kind of digital chaos that didn't come from a recipe going viral. She clicked the link. There it was. Her name. Naomi Carter. Listed among a group of individuals the foundation had allegedly made private offers to in an effort to preserve the Whitaker family's reputation. The article wasn't accusatory, it was careful, deliberate, even respectful, but the implications were thunderous. Especially the excerpt. One source alleges that a woman named Naomi Carter was offered 6 figures by Vivian Whitaker herself to avoid further visibility. Carter declined. This may point to a larger pattern of influence and intimidation. By noon it was everywhere. Local radio, Twitter threads. Even the Phoenix Weekly posted a deep dive follow-up titled, The Woman Who Said. No Naomi Carter's Quiet Rebellion. Naomi didn't speak to the press. She didn't return calls. Instead, she stirred her sweet potato mash and chopped rosemary like any other prep day. But in her bones she knew something had shifted. Across town, Julian sat in a boardroom on the 18th floor of the Whitaker Group's headquarters, a tablet in his lap, the article glowing on its screen. The air was thick with tension. 12 board members, 1 empty chair, his mother's. She's not coming, he asked. One of the board members, Paul, an old lawyer with tired eyes, cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitaker is out of the country. She sent a written statement. Julian didn't need to read it. He could guess the contents: denial, misunderstanding, charity framed as misunderstood kindness. He stood. "I'm not going to defend my mother," he said, voice steady. "Not today. What I will say is this: Naomi Carter never asked for our money. She didn't demand reparation. She didn't seek revenge." He looked around the room. "She simply refused to disappear." A murmur moved through the room like a ripple. "She stood her ground while I built an empire on forgetting. And now, because the truth finally clawed its way to daylight, some of you want to retreat." Julian held up his tablet. "Well, you don't get to retreat. Not anymore. The world's watching." That afternoon, Naomi stepped out back behind her restaurant to take a breath. The sky above was soft gray, and the wind carried whispers of rain. "Ms. Carter." She turned. A young black woman in a tan trench coat stood by the alley entrance, nervous, clutching a microphone. Naomi tensed. "You a reporter?" "No, ma'am. I'm a teacher, but I used to work for the Whitakers, housekeeping staff. My name's Deja." Naomi blinked. "I remember you. You were just a teenager." Deja nodded. "I'm not here to dig. I just wanted to say thank you. Back then, when they let my mom go without notice, you gave us 3 months' rent. You didn't ask for anything back. You told my mom, no one deserves to be discarded quietly." Naomi's eyes softened. Deja pulled something from her bag, a flash drive. "There's something on here," she said, voice shaking. "A voicemail from Vivienne. From back then. She left it by accident when she meant to hang up." Naomi hesitated. "What's on it?" Deja held it out. "She says things about you, about why she fired my mom. She says you were becoming a symbol, and that was dangerous. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe I knew one day it would matter." Naomi took the drive slowly. "I don't want attention," Deja added, "but I figured you deserve the truth, and the truth deserves air." Naomi nodded. "Thank you." Deja left as quietly as she'd arrived. Naomi stood alone in the alleyway, the flash drive cool in her hand. For years she'd kept her silence out of pride, out of strategy, out of self-preservation. But maybe now silence was no longer strength. Maybe now truth was the only thing louder than money. That Friday night, Naomi walked into a packed community hall off Roosevelt and 7th. The city council had scheduled a public forum in response to the recent Whitaker Foundation allegations. What was supposed to be a small discussion about urban funding had become a standing room only event. Reporters lined the back walls. Local activists filled the front rows. City officials clutched notes and practiced neutral expressions. And in the center of it all, Julian sat alone, head high. Naomi had no intention of speaking. She told herself she was only attending to support the other women in her coalition, Mothers Cooks, Survivors Mentors. She wore no makeup, just her black apron and her everyday flats. But the moment she stepped through the door, the cameras turned. "Ms. Carter, do you have a statement about the voicemail leak?" "Naomi, are you planning legal action against the Whitakers?" She said nothing. Julian rose when he saw her and crossed the aisle. "They're going to open the floor to public comments." Naomi gave a small nod. "And you're going to speak." "I already did," he replied. "But they need to hear you. Not because you owe them, but because you don't." She looked past him toward the stage. The microphone stood empty, lit by a soft spotlight. It looked more like a judgment seat than a speaking podium. Then someone said her name. Softly at first, then louder. "Naomi." It was Deja, seated near the front. She met Naomi's gaze and nodded slowly, as if giving silent permission. Naomi walked toward the mic. When she stood there, the room hushed. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. She scanned the audience and cleared her throat, not from nerves, but from weight. Decades of it. "My name is Naomi Carter," she began, "and for most of my life, I've been told my voice was best used for service, for taking orders, for soothing other people's discomfort." She paused. "Tonight, I'll use it for myself." A wave of quiet affirmation rolled through the crowd. "I didn't ask to be in this position. I didn't want to be dragged into headlines or scandals. I wanted to run my restaurant, mentor young women, be left alone. But when silence is used to protect the powerful and erase the rest of us, then silence becomes complicity. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a flash drive. This contains a voicemail from Vivian Whitaker left accidentally, but full of intent. In it, she refers to me as a threat, says I was becoming a symbol. Naomi looked directly into the sea of faces. I didn't set out to become a symbol. I set out to survive. And somewhere along the way, I learned that survival, when you do it loud enough, becomes a revolution. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then swelling until it filled the entire hall. Naomi waited until it calmed, then continued. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for restoration, for truth, for the women who were fired without notice, for the girls told they didn't belong in boardrooms or bank statements, for the mothers who kept the lights on by sheer force of will. She glanced at Julian, and for the people who left, so they'd know we kept going. Someone in the back shouted, "Preach." Naomi smiled. This city doesn't need another tower with the Whitaker name on it. It needs spaces that honor the hands who built it, the stories that were never told, the truth that refused to die. And with that, she stepped away from the mic. No tears, no breakdown, just thunderous applause chasing her off stage like a standing ovation in a courtroom. Outside the hall, Naomi stood on the curb, eyes on the moon rising over the Phoenix skyline. Julian joined her a few moments later. They'll talk about that speech for a long time, he said. Naomi shook her head gently. I'm not interested in becoming a headline. You already are, he replied. But this time it's for the right reasons. She turned to face him. This isn't over, she said. There's still fallout to come. They'll come after me in other ways. Julian nodded. Then let them. You don't stand alone anymore. For the first time in years, Naomi believed that might be true. 3 days after Naomi's speech, a video clip of her testimony hit 2.3 million views on YouTube. The title read, "She Said No to Power. Naomi Carter Breaks Her Silence." Local news anchors called it the defining voice of a generation of community builders. The Phoenix Post ran a full Sunday feature titled, "The Revolution Was Catered: How Naomi Carter Turned a Kitchen into a Movement." But it wasn't the headlines that marked the turning point. It was what happened next. The city's Office of Equity and Inclusion announced an inquiry into the Whitaker Foundation's past hiring and donation practices. A panel was assembled. Testimonies were requested. Whistleblowers came forward. And one of them on the first day of hearings was Deja's mother. She stood before the panel, voice calm but resolute, and told them how she'd been fired for asking too many questions, how Naomi, the chef they'd once labeled unimportant, was the only one who treated her with dignity. I would have ended up on the street, she said. But Naomi Carter kept me human. The hearing room, full of reporters and legal counsel, sat in stunned silence. Even the panelists shifted in their chairs. That night, Vivian Whitaker resigned from the foundation's board. Her public statement was cold, calculated. But her legacy, long untouched, had been cracked open for good. And Naomi, she didn't gloat. She didn't post a single word online. Instead, she reopened her restaurant the next morning at 7:30 a.m., flipped the sign to "Yes, we're open," and served a table of construction workers, sweet tea, and fried okra. Because justice for her wasn't about spotlights. It was about staying, about building, about still showing up. And now, finally, the city had shown up with her. The Whitaker Foundation's gala was once the pinnacle of Phoenix's social calendar, an annual celebration draped in glittering gowns, rooftop jazz, and enough high-profile donors to fund a dozen city projects. But this year, the ballroom at the Andorra Hotel had a different kind of electricity in the air. Gone were the corporate banners. Several major sponsors had quietly pulled their funding in the wake of the scandal. And the guest list, once filled with senators and CEOs, now included more community leaders, activists, and journalists than ever before. At the center of it all stood Vivian Whitaker, still poised, still wearing her signature ivory silk, but her once fearless smile had dulled to a polite flicker. Her eyes darted too quickly. She shook hands with calculated grace, but her fingers trembled when she reached for her glass. The board had not removed her completely. They let her save face by announcing her transition to emeritus advisor. But everyone knew she had been dethroned. Her legacy now lived in articles, leaked recordings, and 1,000-clip soundbites replayed on the evening news. And tonight, for the first time in decades, Naomi Carter was also on the guest list. But not as a caterer, not as staff, not as an invisible helper moving through the shadows. She was invited as an honoree. Julian arrived first. He wore a dark navy suit, tailored but understated. He didn't care about turning heads tonight. He cared about turning tides. As he stepped into the ballroom, a few guests looked up in surprise, some in sympathy, a few in quiet admiration. A reporter whispered he came alone, but they were wrong. 10 minutes later, the room shifted. Naomi walked in. She wore a midnight black dress, elegant in its simplicity, her hair pulled back to reveal a small pair of gold earrings, her mother's. The only thing brighter than the spotlights above was the silence that followed her steps. Not one camera flash popped, and yet every eye was on her. Julian met her near the entrance. "You came," he said softly. "You didn't think I would," she replied. "I didn't know if you should have to." Naomi smiled faintly. "I'm not here for them. I'm here for everyone they overlooked." He offered his arm. She took it. Together they walked through the center of a room that had once written her out of the story. The MC cleared his throat at the podium. "Tonight we recognize individuals who have made enduring impacts on Phoenix's communities. People who didn't just build businesses, but built bridges." Applause. The MC continued. "Please welcome our keynote presenter, Amani Carter." The room erupted. Naomi's eyes widened. She hadn't known. Amani walked onto the stage in a tailored burgundy suit, face calm but eyes gleaming. She stood before the microphone and began. "When I was 5 years old, my mother made me a peanut butter sandwich shaped like Arizona. She said, 'If you can feed the land will feed you back.' I didn't know then that she meant it literally." Laughter rippled through the room. Amani's smile turned solemn. "My mother isn't a politician. She isn't a billionaire. She doesn't own towers or stocks. But she built something no one else in this room could. She built a place where forgotten people remembered their worth." People leaned in closer. "She was once offered hush money by this very institution. She declined. She was told to step aside. She stepped forward. And because of her, a dozen women now own their own businesses. Because of her, I learned to speak, to fight, to stand." Her voice rose. "Tonight, we don't just honor Naomi Carter. We acknowledge that it was never about honoring her. It was about catching up to her. So please give her the welcome this city should have given her 20 years ago." Thunderous applause shook the chandeliers. Naomi slowly rose from her seat. Vivian across the room did not. She sat motionless, lips pressed tight, hands folded. For once there was nothing left to orchestrate, no strings to pull, just truth marching forward. Naomi stood at the center of the stage, the applause still echoing in her ears. She hadn't prepared a speech. She never imagined she'd be asked to give one. Not in a room like this. Not under lights that once shone only on the wealthy, the famous, the untouchable. She stepped up to the microphone. Her hands didn't shake. "Thank you," she began. "I'm honored, truly. But I want to start by telling the truth." The crowd quieted instantly. "I didn't build my restaurant to make a point. I didn't mentor young women to prove anything to anyone. I did those things because I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be written off, to walk into rooms like this one and feel like furniture." Some guests shifted uncomfortably. "I was never invited to galas. I was asked to serve them. I was never asked to sit at the table. I was expected to clear it." She looked around the ballroom, her gaze unflinching. "But here's the thing, dignity doesn't need an invitation, and justice will find its own way in." Applause quieter this time, more thoughtful. From the front rows, young professionals, small business owners, women in head wraps and braids who recognized their own reflection in Naomi. She went on. "I want to share this honor with every woman who turned down a check and chose her pride. With every mother who used her last dollars, not for escape, but for groceries. with every person in this room who knows that silence is heavy, but truth is heavier, and still chooses to carry it anyway. She stepped back. The applause roared again. But this time Naomi didn't flinch. She stood tall and received it. After the ceremony, a line formed near her table. People waiting not to ask for a photo, but to thank her. Quietly, humbly. One woman dressed in designer silk and pearls approached with hesitation. Naomi recognized her Angela Desmond, a donor, a socialite, someone who had once brushed past Naomi at a silent auction like she didn't exist. Angela smiled nervously. Naomi, I just wanted to say, I owe you an apology. Naomi raised an eyebrow. For what? For not seeing you, Angela said. You catered my daughter's wedding years ago. I remember how flawless it was. I remember people praising the menu, but I don't remember saying thank you. I'm sorry for that. Naomi looked at her a long moment. Then she nodded. Acknowledgement goes further than regret. Angela exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. Do you consult? She asked. I'm thinking of opening a nonprofit cafe in Glendale. I want to do it right. I want to do it your way. Naomi's lips curled into the smallest smile. We can talk. Across the room, Julian stood quietly watching it all. He didn't approach right away. He knew this wasn't his moment. It was hers. But as Naomi moved through the crowd, accepting hugs, shaking hands, exchanging words that would stick with people longer than champagne, she finally found her way to him. You've been quiet tonight, she said. I just wanted to see you in your element, he replied. Turns out it's not a kitchen. It's a kingdom. She laughed, really laughed from the belly like she used to when they were kids. Julian smiled. I'm proud of you. Naomi looked at him, not with the past in her eyes, but the future. I didn't come here for pride, she said. I came here to remind this room we exist, that we always have, that they don't get to forget us anymore. He nodded. And they won't. They stood in silence for a moment, not needing to fill it. Then Naomi looked over toward the far wall where Vivian still sat sipping from a half-empty flute, watching it all like a ghost in her own legacy. Will you speak to her? Julian asked. Naomi didn't even glance back. No, not tonight. Some endings don't need dialogue. The following week, the city of Phoenix held its annual Community Impact Ceremony, usually a quiet affair attended by educators, organizers, and city council members. But this year, the crowd spilled out onto the steps of City Hall. Naomi stood behind the stage curtain, Amani by her side, adjusting the sleeve of her tailored navy dress. You okay? Amani asked. Naomi nodded, just trying not to cry before they hand me the thing. They both laughed. A moment later, the MC's voice rang out. Please welcome this year's recipient of the Phoenix Legacy Award, Naomi Carter. As Naomi stepped onto the stage, the entire courtyard rose to its feet. But it wasn't the applause that moved her. It was the faces. Cooks, bus drivers, former students, women she had mentored, men who had eaten their first full meal in weeks at a restaurant, city workers she'd never met but who knew her name. This time the spotlight didn't make her feel exposed. It made her feel seen. The mayor handed her the plaque. For courage, for resilience, and for reminding this city what real legacy looks like. Naomi held it not like a trophy, but like a mirror, reflecting not just her own strength, but every woman who had ever been told she didn't belong. That evening, Naomi returned to her restaurant. She unlocked the door, walked inside, and placed the award on the shelf above the register, next to a photo of her mother and a handwritten menu from her first day of business. She didn't need champagne. She didn't need fireworks. She had something better. Peace. 6 months later, the walls of Naomi's table looked different. The same brick and mortar, sure. The same open kitchen, the same long reclaimed wood table in the center. But now on Thursdays, it wasn't serving dinner. It was serving blueprints, vision boards, practice interviews, confidence. Naomi had launched something new, the Carter Collective, a 6-month mentorship and culinary training program for young Black women in Phoenix. They didn't just learn how to cook, they learned how to lead. The classroom was her kitchen, the textbooks her scars. On this particular afternoon, Naomi stood over a station where a girl named Lexi, barely 20, but with fire in her eyes, was learning to season broth from scratch. "No shortcuts," Naomi said gently, watching her stir. "The heat teaches you patience." Lexi grinned. "You sound like my grandma." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "That a compliment or a complaint?" "Both," Lexi said, laughing. Across the room, two other women were reviewing business plans while chopping vegetables. On the chalkboard wall behind them, someone had written in pink marker, "We are not here to be saved. We are here to remember we were powerful all along." Naomi didn't write it. She didn't need to. Later that week, a formal letter arrived. The National Culinary Equity Summit had invited Naomi to deliver the keynote address in Chicago, all expenses paid. Prime slot, black tie crowd, press guaranteed. Naomi read the letter once, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer beside her mother's recipes. She didn't need another podium. She had her table. One quiet morning, Naomi walked through the garden behind the restaurant. They'd converted the empty lot next door into a greenhouse with the help of local volunteers and a small city grant. Fresh herbs, tomatoes, mustard greens, and collards bloomed in neat rows. She crouched near a planter box checking the basil. That's when she saw the envelope. No postage, no return address. Just one word written across the front, Naomi. She opened it. Inside was a single page. The handwriting was sharp, controlled, familiar. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll know that I see you now. Truly see you. And maybe that matters more than my name ever did." It was signed V. Whitaker. Naomi stared at it for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't burn it. She folded it once and slid it between the pages of a book on the shelf inside, next to a letter from a teenage Julian she had never mailed and a hand-drawn card from Amani when she was 8. Let the words live there. Let them stay in the past where they belonged. In the kitchen that evening, Naomi looked at her students sweating, laughing, experimenting, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope that didn't require healing first. Just hope, the kind you build with your own hands. The sun was just setting when Naomi stood at the edge of the Carter Collective's new community kitchen, watching Lexi teach two younger students how to plate cornbread without it falling apart. It was a quiet kind of pride, no grand announcement, no fancy ribbon cutting, but everything in that space spoke volumes. The counters were built by a Black-owned carpentry business in South Phoenix. The aprons had been hand-stitched by formerly incarcerated women from a local nonprofit. And the pantry, it was stocked with donations from mothers who had once stood in food bank lines and now ran food cooperatives of their own. Naomi stepped inside and tapped the chalkboard. 10 minutes till wrap-up, she called. They all groaned in unison, but with affection. No one really wanted to leave. Lexi jogged over, flowers still on her face. "Ms. Naomi, we've got something for you." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "What kind of something?" "Just wait," Lexi said, grinning. She disappeared into the hallway and returned a moment later, holding a large canvas wrapped in brown butcher paper. The girls gathered around, whispering and nudging each other like kids on the last day of school. Naomi peeled the paper back. Underneath was a hand-painted sign. Naomi's Table. 8, 2004, rebuilt 21-55. Not a restaurant, a revolution. Naomi didn't speak for a few seconds. Then she whispered, "You made this." Lexi nodded. "All of us. It was Deja's idea. She said this place didn't just feed us, it dared us to exist bigger." Naomi swallowed hard. "This is going on the front wall," she said, "where everyone can see it." The girls erupted in cheers. Someone played music from a phone. Within minutes, there were impromptu dance steps and laughter echoing off the tile walls. And in the middle of it all, Naomi stood still, soaking it in, not just the noise, but the aliveness of it all. The joy. The audacity. She hadn't just created a space. She'd lit a match in a city full of shadows. That night, Naomi walked home alone through the neighborhood stars blinking above and the scent of citrus blooming from the trees nearby. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Julian. "I saw the collective featured in the Chronicle. You made something real, Naomi. Let me know if you ever need anything." or if you just want to share a meal. No suits, no cameras, just us. She smiled at the screen, typed back, "Thank you. I'm good, but I'll let you know when I'm ready to feed you again. It might be a while, I'm cooking for an army over here." She put the phone away. She didn't feel a pang of what if. She felt full, not because she'd found closure, but because she'd built a door where there was once only a wall. Back at the restaurant, she unlocked the small drawer behind the register. Inside were dozens of letters, thank you notes, graduation photos, job offers, accepted even one wedding invitation. All from women who had once walked through her door, unsure if they belonged in a kitchen or in this world. She picked one up. It was from a girl named Rena, now attending culinary school on a full scholarship through Naomi's new fund. "Ms. Naomi, I used to think strong women were born that way. Now I know they're cooked slowly over time and with care. Thank you for turning the fire into something I could follow." Naomi smiled and placed the letter gently back. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The next morning, Naomi arrived early. The city was still waking up, streetlights blinking off coffee shops, flickering open sidewalks glistening with dew. She unlocked the door to Naomi's table and stepped into the silence. No students yet, no clatter of pans. Just her, the sound of breath, and the warmth of a space she had shaped with her own hands. She set a pot of water on the stove and pulled out a notebook, leather-bound corners frayed. Her mother's old recipe journal. Between the pages were scribbled ideas, food stains, even a pressed basil leaf from the garden out back. Naomi flipped to a blank page. At the top she wrote "Legacy Soup" for those rebuilding. And then slowly she began writing out a recipe, not just for broth or flavor, but for healing, for starting again, for making a home out of fire. At noon, a new cohort of students arrived, wide-eyed and unsure. Naomi welcomed them one by one. No grand speeches, just eye contact, just presence. Then she led them into the kitchen, handed each a clean apron, and said the same word she always did. "Here we don't just learn to cook, we learn to rise." That afternoon, someone asked her if she missed the spotlight. Naomi smiled. "I never needed lights. I just needed to make sure no one else had to walk alone in the dark." She turned back to the stove. The broth was just starting to boil. "Justice isn't just making someone pay," she once told Amani. "It's making sure no one else has to." Subscribe to Black HerStory Told if you believe stories like hers deserve to be heard. Because some women don't just survive, they rebuild the world.